Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So, unfortunately, there haven't really been any big news stories lately, but there have been a ton of smaller ones. So I figured for simplicity's sake, I would take a handful of the ones that I'm more interested in and combine them into one video. So, let's get into it. The first thing I want to talk about is this extremely ambitious roadmap that CD Projekt Red just put out. And it's ambitious not just because it has 7 games on it, but also because of who it's coming from, right? This is CDPR we're talking about. This is a studio that has proven recently that they have extreme management problems, right? And in particular, have a lot of struggle putting out quality games on time. And so for them to say, here are the next 7 games we're going to make, granted they didn't put it on an actual timetable, is, I mean, hopefully it means that they're a lot more confident than I feel in them, and hopefully they can hit these dates. But regardless, what they announced is, first of all, a bunch of Witcher games, right? So they've got this new Project Polaris, which is a whole new trilogy of Witcher games. I'm assuming that this is going to be pretty much a direct sequel from the original 3 Witcher games, whether it follows Geralt or Ciri or maybe one of the other major characters. It seems like this is going to be their major thing going forward, right? Then they've also got Project Sirius, which is being made by Molasses Flood, a smaller studio that they acquired in the run-up to to Cyberpunk 2077. You might know some of the games that they made. They made Drake's Hollow and Flame in the Flood, both of which I think were on Game Pass, so you may have played them. They're decent. I wouldn't say that they're anything like super special, and like you didn't necessarily miss anything if you didn't play them. But they are a talented studio. Although it does make me think that Sirius is maybe going to be a smaller game. And then the, I guess, 5th Witcher game that they announced is one called Canis Majoris, or Project Canis Majoris, and it's being made by an undisclosed third-party studio that is, quote, led by Witcher 3 vets, which I don't know necessarily if that means that the studio has Witcher 3 vets employed at it, or if it means that CDPR is lending them some to lead the project. Either way, that does make me feel slightly more confident in the quality level of that one. But I do think the naming structure of these projects is really interesting because, first of all, to call the new trilogy of games Polaris, Polaris is the North Star, right? It's the guiding light. It implies to me this is the big thing. This is the thing that CDPR is putting probably the majority of their faith in, right? Like, this is the thing that has to be successful more so than anything else that they're making. Or so it seems that that's what they're saying based on this project name. Then you look at the other 2, and there's Sirius, which is the Celestial Wolf, which makes sense for The Witcher because, of course, Geralt is the wolf. And Sirius is part of the Canis Majoris constellation. So this sort of backs up my theory that Project Sirius, because it's being made by Molasses Flood, who only has made kind of smaller games, it seems to me that Sirius might just be a part of the Project Canis Majoris, right? Just like the star Sirius is only a part of the Canis Majoris constellation. I think that tracks. I don't know. Maybe I've overthought it. But it does definitely make me think, at minimum, that the 2 are related. Over on the cyberpunk side of things, the side of things that I'm significantly less interested in because of recent events, they've continued to affirm that they're still making this Phantom Liberty DLC, which we still know surprisingly little about. And they've doubled down on the cyberpunk franchise by saying that they're making a sequel to it called Project Orion, which they claim is a sequel, I don't know if they mean a story sequel or just like a spiritual successor, like an anthology thing, but to the original one, Cyberpunk 2077, and that it is aiming to prove the full power and potential of the cyberpunk universe, which is fair because surely 2077 is not the best they can do, right? CDPR is an extremely talented studio, and Cyberpunk 2077 did not prove that, right? If that was the only CDPR game you've ever played, please do yourself a favor and go and play Witcher 3, where they actually have good writing and actually made a game that functions from start to finish, right? They are an extremely talented studio, and so I do think that them reinvesting in sort of maybe reimagining Cyberpunk in a better way with better writing and maybe controls that actually work and shooting that doesn't feel like crap is something that could really, really help out. I also think it's cool that they've named it Project Orion, because to go back to astrology, again, I put way too much thought into this. Orion is the hunter that fights alongside Canis Majoris. It's just it's like the big dog or something, basically. Which to me says that they are trying to position Cyberpunk as being on level with Witcher, right? They want these two to be sort of at parity in terms of quality. And right now, I think if you asked most people, they're not, right? Obviously, Cyberpunk 2077 launched in a really awful state, and Witcher 3 was like game of the year it came out, right? So like if you look at it now, it's really off skew, but it implies that they want to improve Cyberpunk dramatically, and I'm all for them trying, right? I also hope, so they called it a sequel, and I hope that means like it can't be a direct story follow-up. Without spoilers, all of the endings of Cyberpunk 2077 don't really leave a lot of room for a direct sequel. Certainly not one where you play as V, or probably really any of the characters from that first game. You know, I would be surprised if Johnny Silverhand was in it. I would be surprised if like V or Pan Am or any of them really were in it. So hopefully they just do a complete clean break, right? It's a different city, a different set of characters, hopefully different writers, because the Cyberpunk writing was really, really bad in my opinion. Like, I played that game a year after launch, right? So I got to avoid the majority of the bugs. It still had more than I would have been happy with at launch, but, you know, even a year afterwards, like there's no patch you can put in to fix how bad the writing and the characters in that game are. So hopefully they sort that out. The bugs, you know, that's something that just a little bit of better management, maybe a better timetable can fix that. But writing, that's something that you need actual real improvement on. So hopefully they can do that. And then the other thing that I want to point out, just as a later point, is that Orion, the Orion's belt specifically, is used as a marker for the equator, right? So if you're looking at the night sky and Orion's belt is to your north, then that means that you're on the south hemisphere. And if you are looking at it and it's on the south, then that means you're on the northern hemisphere, right? So it's this, it sort of lends itself to being divergent, which is what I'm hoping that they will do with the sequel and have it be just something completely different. And then the last thing that they announced as part of this roadmap is a completely brand new IP, which they call Project Hadar, or Hadar. I don't know. I don't know how to pronounce these things. But they are naming this as the company's third pillar, right? And it's a brand new IP. To go to the astrology side of it, because Hadar is, of course, also a star. It is part of, or Hadar is also called the Centaurus constellation, which is it's a centaur, not to be confused with Sagittarius, which is a different thing. But it depicts the Greek mythological character Chiron, who is a tutor to heroes like Hercules, Theseus, Jason. If you've read the Percy Jackson books, you are familiar with this character. But I think that that's really telling for what they hope that Hadar will become, because to me, it feels like what this implies is that they are taking what they learned from The Witcher and from Cyberpunk, and they're using it as a teaching, like a piece of tutoring, basically, for this new project, right? Because this is going to be the first IP that they completely own, right? Both The Witcher and Cyberpunk were pre-existing things. Cyberpunk was a tabletop game, and The Witcher was a book series, but this is entirely their own, or at least so they say. I guess we don't know for sure yet, but they are saying that it's something completely unique. So here's hoping. The legs of the Centaurus constellation, or Hadar, make up the Southern Cross, which I think is really cool. Because, so between these three IPs, they have Polaris, the North Star, Orion's Belt, the Equator, and Hadar, which includes the Southern Cross. So they have these three very important navigational constellations. And I think that that's sort of the way that CDPR is looking at these IP, right? They're looking at it as, these are sort of their guiding lights, almost literally, for the future. And so I think it's really cool the way that they've made these project names. I've way overthought this, if you can't tell, but I really like it. What I will say, though, is I am not crazy about this new trend of companies just announcing like a ton of games that don't have a title and we don't really know anything about. Ubisoft just did this with Assassin's Creed, where they announced Assassin's Creed Red and Jade and Hex, and like all they gave us for those were settings. And Bethesda has done it to a lesser extent with like Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout, where they're just like, yeah, we're going to make that, and then after that, in like 10 years, we're going to make Fallout 5, and it's like, okay. And then Amy Hennig just did it with Skydance. I think it's Skydance New Media is like the full company name or whatever. But with her new like Captain America / Black Panther game, there's a lot of people who really like this because it's a new level of transparency, and it sort of reminds people of how like the film industry does it, where they'll announce, like, look at the MCU, they'll announce or movies that are coming out like 6 years from now, right? For the MCU, we know the next like 3 phases of movies, and I mean, they'll add more things in, but we know the general guideline for, I think, like the next 6 years of MCU films, right? And I think that works better in film than it works in games, because games are a lot more tenuous, right? Games get canceled and delayed and changed so much that I feel like calling your shot this early is extremely risky, especially if you're somebody like Ubisoft or CD Projekt Red, who has not had a great track record of hitting timetables and making things actually come out, like Skull and Bones, like Cyberpunk 2077, right? Maybe I would feel more comfortable with this if it was coming from somebody like Xbox or PlayStation, where I have more faith in those companies. But I'm just, at the moment, I'm not loving it. But I do really like the idea of all of these things that CD Projekt Red has announced, and I really hope that they stick the landing. The next thing I want to talk about is CADE, the Brazilian Trade Commission, approved the acquisition of Activision Blizzard. And my immediate reaction to it was, of course they did, right? Because every trade commission is going to, right? Mark my words, this deal is going through. I have no doubt of that in my mind, right? What I do think is extra cool is that they specifically did not ask for any concessions or anything else from Microsoft. They basically just said, like, yes, this deal is fine. I see no problems with it. And what that means is that all that lying and crying that Jen Dance Moves Ryan has been doing have amounted to absolutely nothing, and they're going to continue to amount to absolutely nothing in all of these other trade commissions, mark my words, right? I've seen a lot of people defending Jim's behavior and being like, well, he has to protect his interests and the interests of his shareholders, and it's like, how is this doing that? He's not going to accomplish anything. No one's going to ask for any concessions. Even if they did, Microsoft would just sue back with their army of lawyers and end up making money off of it. So, like, what is the point of any of this, right? Like, he doesn't have an argument to stand on. And we know that because one of the things that they specifically said in CADE's acceptance of this acquisition was that their decision was made, quote, for Brazilian consumers, not the defense of the particular interests of specific competitors, which says to me that the only arguments that they got against this acquisition came directly from PlayStation, and PlayStation, their only argument was that they didn't want it to happen, right? They didn't have any good reason why it should actually be blocked or why it was actually bad for competition, because there isn't one, right? There is no reason why this deal is bad for competition or why any trade commission should care about whether or not this deal comes through. They should all just be approving it. Of course, it's a huge monetary value deal, so they're all going to look at it with a fine-tooth comb, and that's completely understandable, but like, there's no reason to actually block it, right? And that's what CADE and the Brazilian Trade Commission are saying here, right? And it's great because it puts extra pressure on everyone else who hasn't approved it yet, especially people like the CMA who were saying some really weird, like, pro Sony, like almost they were in the pocket of Sony things whenever they were questioned about it a while ago. And to be fair, like I said earlier, they were probably just trying to, feign relevance and like earn a paycheck, because this is a really big money value deal, and so they want to, earn their paycheck for everyone who has to look over these things. And it was always going to be something that was heavily scrutinized, but I don't think that there's any argument against it. And more to the point, it makes PlayStation look pathetic, not just to me and you, but to the rest of the industry and to all of their shareholders, right? Like, we've seen other people in the industry coming out and saying like the Take-Two guy just came out the other day and was like, yeah, this deal is no problem. Like, this is will, if anything, increase competition, right? And they're like, their shareholders are not going to be happy about this, right? The PlayStation shareholders. Because imagine you're walking through a dark alley with your boyfriend and a mugger jumps out and he's like, don't worry, honey, I got this. And then he just starts crying and like falls to his knees. Are you going to have confidence that he does in fact have this? Like, are you going to feel confident in his ability to win a fight in future? No, of course not. And that's exactly what Jim Ryan is doing here. Like, he's throwing away all credibility and just looking extremely weak, right? So Brazil approved it. Saudi Arabia approved it earlier, but they don't even really, like, they would approve probably anything, so I don't know that Saudi Arabia is really worth mentioning. And these are just, the first approvals, right? This is going to be like a domino effect. The more that these go through, it puts more and more pressure on the people who haven't put it through, and they're, over the next probably 4 to 6 months, this deal is going to be completely done with. I really don't have much else to say about this. We talked about it a lot on the podcast. If you don't know, I'm on the Xbox Factor podcast over at Mr. Boomstick XL's channel. It goes live every single Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. Central or 12 Eastern. You can find old episodes of it in a playlist on the channel that just says podcast appearances, or you can catch us live. If you want to hear more about this topic, that's where we'll be talking about it. The other thing that I want to mention about this is that there's been a new development as of this morning where people have been saying that PlayStation canceled their showcase this year to intentionally look weak so that they had more of a leg to stand on for blocking this deal, right? And it's like, that doesn't make sense at all, right? That's, first of all, not true. PlayStation didn't do that. And second of all, it wouldn't make sense even if they did, because all that the trade commissions have to do is ask PlayStation. Like, if they're concerned about who's going to have more exclusives, which they're not, all they would have to do is ask PlayStation for their information on what they're working on and what deals they have, and PlayStation would be obliged to give over that information, right? So if they wanted to get a one-for-one of the future of what these two companies were doing, not having a showcase is not going to prevent that from happening, right? People are just looking for an excuse for why PlayStation didn't have a showcase. And because the Activision Blizzard deal is the biggest thing going in the industry right now, it's a really easy scapegoat for people to pin things on. But, I mean, think about it, right? PlayStation has also skipped E3 and Gamescom and every major showcase for the last, 2+ years, right? This is just another example of that. The worst thing you can say, and I don't even know if it's true, is that this, to me, is starting to imply that PlayStation maybe is going into a pretty lackluster 2023. Maybe they don't have a lot to show. It's just another point in favor of PlayStation just not looking good right now. Then we had this story about how, shocker, Game Pass makes a lot of money. And my immediate reaction, again, like the last story, was like, of course it does, right? We're talking about a $10 to $15 a month subscription that is currently held by 25 million people, last we heard, probably much higher by this point, right? We have the exact numbers on it, actually. Is in 2021, they made $2.9 billion from Game Pass on consoles. To put that into perspective, all of Xbox Gaming made $16.28 billion. So 18% of all of Xbox's income comes directly from Game Pass, right? And just Game Pass on console, right? That's not including Game Pass PC, any of that, right? Just console. And there are still people who think that Game Pass isn't profitable. I don't understand it, right? I don't understand how you can be this dense unless you just don't want Game Pass to be profitable because of fanboy reasons, right? and I know what the argument is, right? It's people saying, "Oh, well, that 2.9 billion, that's revenue, not profit." And it's like, yes, okay, they didn't pocket 2.9 billion dollars, but they absolutely made a profit off of that, right? Show me where in 2021 what games going into Game Pass cost them 2.9 billion dollars, right? Show me the deals that add up to 2.9 billion dollars. You can't do it because it doesn't make sense. Like, those numbers they don't add up, right? And even so, like, this is a number, like, this is from 2021, right? This is before they were at the 25 million subscribers that they were at last we heard of. And they're probably even higher than that now. So they're making more and more money every year. Once they get Call of Duty in there and some of these other, like, really popular, like, casual games in there, like, this is a profitable service. I'm sorry to I'm shocked that I have to be the one to break this to some people, but it's a profitable service. I would say, honestly, at this point, if you're watching a podcast or a YouTube video or anything, and the person on it says that Game Pass does not make money, you can just go ahead and turn that video off, because they do not know what they're talking about, right? Just look at the numbers. Like, they have said so many times, it's profitable, it's sustainable. They've said all of these things. I don't know why so many people think that they are better business people than Microsoft. Like, I don't understand it. Now, what I will say is, I do want to see a breakdown on the financials of this. I don't know that we'll ever get it, but I want to know, like, how much of the profit or how much of that revenue does go to making new deals or getting new games on the service? How much of it goes to advertising the service, right? How much of it comes from subscriptions? Or whereas, do we count additional purchases like microtransactions or like DLC for games that they don't own but they're playing through the service? Do we count that as part of the revenue? Like, these are things that I would be really interested in finding out, but it is laughable to me for people to still continue to say that Game Pass does not make a profit, which they are still saying to this day. I watched a podcast yesterday where somebody said it, and oh boy. Next up, we got kind of a sad one. That's right, Stadia is officially dead. Pour one out for all 3 people on the planet who cared about Stadia at all. Looking at you, Ty. It's officially dead. I know you could have argued that it was dead since the second it was announced, like even before it was officially released, because it was never going to work. It was absolutely never going to work. You look at the way that they were monetizing it, and it was absolutely never going to be popular with anybody. They didn't have the support of games. They didn't have a quality product. Like, the technology didn't work. The games weren't there. The way that you paid for it was garbage. Like, it was never going to work. And that's partially because streaming as a platform, like, as streaming being the only option to play games that you paid for, is never going to be a thing that people want to do, right? Because first of all, it's too spotty, right? There are huge swaths of the planet where you will never be able to get a streaming service like Stadia working. It just won't happen, right? I'm in Texas, between Dallas and Fort Worth. Like, I'm in a metroplex area, and it barely worked here. Like, you could turn it on and play a game, but it was noticeably worse, like dramatically noticeably worse, right? And I have good internet. So you're telling me that some guy in, like, the Ozarks in Missouri is going to have it work, or some guy in, like, Brazil? Like, no, it doesn't work. It's not a good, like, the service doesn't work. It'll never be able to compete with local hardware on any level, right? Because there's people who are saying, like, oh, soon streaming technology will be at parity with local hardware. No, it won't. It never will be. Like, you're talking about streaming technology improving, which it will, but at the same time that it's improving, so will local hardware. So it's this moving goalpost, and they're never going to meet. It's just not going to happen, right? Like, I'm sorry. It's just never going to happen. It's a really great additional thing for things like Game Pass or, like, for PS Plus, right? It's a great secondary option for when you can't get to local hardware. It will never replace local hardware. It's just not going to happen. The one really funny thing that comes out of this is people finally starting to realize that Phil Harrison is cursed. I've been saying this for years, so it's funny to finally get recognition for that. But yeah, no. If you are the one person on the planet, the one of 3 people who is sad that Stadia is dead, Sorry about you, dude. And last, and also probably least in terms of how much I have to say about it, is E3's back, baby. We finally got dates for when E3's coming back and sort of a breakdown on how it's going to work, and it sounds really promising, right? It's being run by the PAX people who have done a fantastic show. They do PAX, they also do like Star Wars Celebration, so they have a lot of experience in doing really big, important shows. I'm really excited for it. They have separate days for press and for fans, which is something that I know journalists have been asking for a really long time. So it sounds like it's going to be more ideal for literally every single person involved. You know, I guess there's still the question of like who's actually going to show up, but I guarantee like Microsoft will be there, Ubisoft, EA, like the big names will be there. You know, will Sony still be out in the rain? You know, we don't need E3, like probably. But I think there'll be enough people there to make it an extremely worthwhile show. And, you know, like RIP Summer Game Fest, you know what I mean? Like, man, they had 3 years to become a competitor for E3, and they just never put on an even remotely decent show. Like, it was terrible every single time. Every single time it was terrible, right? And I don't know. Apparently, they're still going to also do Summer Game Fest this year. I'm not expecting anything for it, or next year I should say, and I'm not expecting anything for it because like now on top of also already being a bad show, they also have to compete with E3, which is going to be a really good show. So it's like, damn, bummer. One really cool thing is that apparently because of the podcast, there's a pretty solid chance that I'm going to be able to go as press, which I'm really excited about. So I'm really glad E3's back, baby. So there you all go. A little bit of a news wrap up for you. I'm really sorry about sort of the spotty amount of content on the channel lately. It's just sort of one of the drawbacks of not being able to do this full time because, you know, YouTube doesn't pay my bills yet. And so I have to occasionally, it seems like most of the time lately, focus on doing the things that actually like pay my rent and put food on my table. But this will always be something that I really love doing. I'm going to try to be more consistent with the content on this channel. We actually just crossed 500 subscribers as a result of the last video, and I'm extremely happy about that. So we're on the climb to 1,000 subscribers. Hopefully we can hit that before E3 next year. I'd love to be able to be in the 1K club before I'm walking around with a press pass, so I could feel like I actually earned it. But thank you all for stopping by. If you like this content and you want to see more of it, you can support this channel by subscribing, obviously, but also just liking the channel, leaving a comment, tell me if there's any other news that happened recently that you want to hear me talk about. Share the channel with your friends. You know, every single bit of help that you guys can give me really, really does mean a lot to me. And so thank you in advance. And until next time, I'll see you around.